Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our services, if we can please kindly turn off all cell phones or electronic devices, or please place them on silent. Thank you.
Shalom, everyone. I'm Rabbi Gary Gans. I'm sad but honored to be with you here today. And we've come together, sharing our sorrow, to commemorate the life of Paul Sussman. We recall the blessing of his life. We thank God for all that was good and true in his life, and for the precious memories which shall endure. Eternal God, his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and friends seek light to dispel the dark gloom that threatens to overwhelm them. Be gracious to those who mourn, for they are in distress. Bless them with your compassion, ease their burden of sorrow, send them light and peace, for it is written, "Fear not, as I am with you." Be gracious, bless them with your compassion, send them light and peace. For it is written, "Fear not, as I am with you, be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, I will help you, I'll sustain you with my power." And let us say, Amen. Just before we began this public ceremony, I cut Jay's ribbon, symbol of tear metaphysically in his life, spiritually in his life, with the death of his father. And there is a code, by the way. Children wear the ribbons on their left-hand sides. Everyone else wears them on their right, so that anyone seeing you automatically would know that you are mourning a parent, and hopefully would address you appropriately. We also acknowledge his wife, Claire. They were married for 72 years? Kinohara. I don't know that any of us will ever meet a number like that in our own personal lives. And he and she will be entombed side by side at the cemetery. At the ceremony that will take place shortly. Also want to acknowledge, the grandchildren. I met a bunch of them, and great-grandchildren, in the side room of Amy, Matthew, Jessica, Catherine, who said that she was Kate, right? Jessica, Rebecca, Allison, and David. But it was the great-grandchildren who were, oh, look at those smiles. In fact, when I call your name, tell me who's who, okay? Ariana, is she here? You're Ariana? Okay. Noah? Sienna? Yes. Okay. Sophie? Landon? Sorry? Okay. Madeline? Ari? Israel. Okay. My youngest son's name is also Ari, by the way. Also the Sirsha, Stella, and Dylan. I also want to acknowledge Pamela, who was a big help to me for the Hebrew names that I'll be reciting eventually, and Marla, and all of you who are here. If anyone's name I didn't mention, you're still held in high esteem, and we appreciate your attendance. I offer on Paul's behalf Psalm 23, a traditional prayer at funerals. Mizmor LeDavid, Adonai ro'i lech lo echsar, benodesha yarbitzeni, Al mei menuchot yanachaleni. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God has me lie down in green pastures and leads me beside the still waters. God guides me on paths of righteousness and revives my soul for the sake of God's glory. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your staff and your rod do comfort me. You set the table in sight of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall abide in the house of the Lord forever. When I went through the names a moment ago, I realized I didn't mention any of the supportive spouses. So let me go through that list as well so that I account for even more people. Anne, Justin, Megan, Zachi, Jeff, Jared, Yvonne. Am I close on that? Okay. David and Priya. Okay. I still extend greetings to everyone else whose name wasn't yet listed, but I didn't want that to be lost. What I found impressive in our conversations was that Paul was 97 and a fraction, a large fraction, and until recently was very healthy and aware. And knowing the services at Lionsgate, you performed an important mitzvah. You prolonged the length of his days and the quality of them by securing such good protection for his life. During the moments before we began, I was in the side room, I was listening kind of to your conversations. There was a joyfulness at meeting each other again, coming together, sharing also the joys of your lives and Paul, as well as the sadness that this moment represents. It's a full range, full spectrum of emotions, and probably the ultimate sadness was when, Jay, you mentioned to me that at his age, most of his friends have predeceased him. I don't know if that's good news or bad news. That he had friends, but that he had to sit through and acknowledge their deaths as well. So that's a balance of life, and it's reflected in the book of Ecclesiastes. For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace, a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. Indeed, it is a time to speak and to share, and I'm honored to call first on Amy to come up to the podium, please. Come down here to the right.
Okay. I was thinking it would just be a few people. Hi, Serge. Grandpa, I keep hearing how lucky you were and how lucky we all are to have had the time with you. That your great-grandchildren knew you so well and had so much time with you. And I get it, but it doesn't make it any easier. You were a very lucky man for a multitude of reasons, and one can only hope to have as good of a life as you did. We all know the stories of childhood and having almost nothing to your name. The son of Jewish immigrants in New York City. Sorry. At a time filled with so many stories, it feels like a movie. But you made a life worth watching. Some of my most prized possessions are just the stories we have of how you and Grandma met and courted. But I remember the stories and the countless, countless photos we have of you and Grandma filled with your friends. So many friends. And in today's world, as a parent myself, I realize how hard it can be to keep those friendships alive. But you literally had countless friends, friendships, and relationships that you kept the entire duration of your life, all the way to the end. That says so much about you as a person and as a friend. You didn't seek out the conversation, but once you got started, you had the chat just as much as anyone else in this family. You lit up talking about friends, old stories, anything sports, whether you were playing them like tennis or you were watching them, especially the Mets, and then who knew, but even later on in your life, it would be the Phillies. I can remember family parties where you would sit out in the car in the driveway, listening to the Mets on the radio because you just couldn't miss it. You lit up talking about politics and what was going on in the world, and I'm truly very lucky to say that I, or we, all come from such exceptionally smart humans. Dad can make jokes, but I never heard you say a bad thing about our grandmother. And the adoration you showed her is something I will never, ever forget. The two of you were a true pair, and as much as it annoyed us at times, although we laugh about it now, I don't think any grandchild will forget what it was like to be told we couldn't sit somewhere because you were waiting for Grandma to be next to you, at a dinner table, on a couch, etc. You loved her and wanted her next to you always, and the romantic in me loved it. And look at what the two of you created. We may not all be here now that we're all scattered across not just the country, but also the globe. Thank you, Jess and Zaki, for that one. But there are so many of us in total, and we all love each other so much. Anyone who knows any one of us knows just how tight and how much love we all have for our siblings and cousins who feel more like siblings. And on top of that, you're leaving this world with 10, but almost 12, soon to be 12, great-grandchildren. And I know there will be even more on the way soon, just not for me. None of us would exist without the love you and Grandma had for one another and of our family. A hard part for me in all of this, aside from losing you, is that you were our last connection to a generation and time in our family that is now gone. I know it has been years, but it still feels really fresh that we lost Uncle Mark and Grandma. And the only comfort I can have in that is that you're hopefully all together now. I can only imagine how happy and appreciative Grandma would be to have the three of you together. As Allie called out, in a funny way, we're sure one of the first things Grandma will ask you is what took you so long. Grandpa, you may have been fortunate or lucky or whatever we all want to call it, but all of us behind you are the luckiest or more fortunate for it. We will all miss you. We love you. Rest in peace, or as much as you can with Grandma and Uncle Mark and the rest of our family by your side. Love you. Love you, Grandpa Paul.
Thank you, Amy. There's so much I take from what you presented. Perhaps the most poignant was their desire to sit side by side, and the knowledge that in a little while we'll be placing them once again side by side. And I'll call on Jade. Please join us.
Tough act to follow. Great job. It's kind of like being immortal because we have you and you guys will live on past us. And glasses would be good. 'cause I can't see anything. First, thank you to our family. Yep. First, thank you to our family and friends, to all our children, to all our grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and grandchildren. You have been loving and supportive. Well, I don't have greats yet. And thank you to Matt for creating all these pictures and all your visuals for us. Gives us the ability to remember Dad as you were all your life, not just at the end. Paul Sussman. I've heard talk of him in many ways, mostly how kind and considerate he was. Wonderful to hear. It's amazing how much you hear about people after they pass from the other people. It's just amazing. Happened with my mother, happened with my father. I didn't see any middle name on his birth certificate. Born and grew up son of immigrants, raised 2 boys, giving 8 grandchildren, and now 10 great-grandchildren, and more to come. Not a bad legacy. So sad as your other child, Mark, passed a few years ago. As we all do, we wish he was here. Most of you know Paul Sussman as Grandpa Paul. As you know, he was my father, and for this, I'll call him Dad. One day, my age near 10, I believe, Dad came home after a hard day working. He was a dress cutter in Manhattan, meaning he cut patterns out of material to make clothing with scissors, now automated. A difficult job, a difficult career. He walks into my room on 295 Ocean Parkway, Flatbush, Brooklyn, sits, I remember like yesterday, sits on my bed and says, "Jay, don't make the mistakes I have made. Get an education, do well, and thereupon, hopefully, success and happiness." Thank you, Dad. I listened. Dad told me a number of stories, now and forever, only secondhand. One was where he was and what he remembered when Bobby Thompson hit his famous pennant-winning home run, stuff like that. While I grew up, we lived on East 21st Street, downtown in Brooklyn. I believe a 20-minute walk from Ebbets Field or the Brooklyn Dodgers. Dad said I used to be able to hear the crowd noise from my crib. That was 2 years before they moved to California. I thought, known to me now wrong, that my parents lived near one another growing up and had lived near where I grew up, Flatbush, Brooklyn. As an adult, one could always root for whatever team you want, but you at least try to adopt the team of your father. My father was an avid New York Met fan. We watched every game at home throughout my entire childhood. So I presumed he had rooted for the Mets, and before that, the Brooklyn Dodgers. And when they moved to California, like many New Yorkers, he migrated to the Mets. So when my kids were young, I bought them Brooklyn Dodger memorabilia, Brooklyn Dodger coats. I still have mine. Mock-up of Ebbets Field, pictures of Ebbets Field, stuff like that. I had it on my desk in the office, often spoke to patients about it. One Saturday afternoon, I'm watching a baseball game with Dad and asking him questions, and he tells me, and I quote, "Mom and I used to spend Saturdays at the Polo Grounds." I said, "Wait, what?" He said, I said, "Polo Grounds is the Giants, New York Giants." I found out he was a New York Giant fan, not a Dodger fan, and he hated the Dodgers. Yeah. I found out, finally saw his birth certificate last week, and that my father was born in the Bronx, not Brooklyn. He was a New York Giant fan, not a Dodger fan. He hated the Dodgers. Couldn't believe it. He was born in 1926, turned 17 in 1943. Not a great year to turn 17. As they all did, he volunteered into the Navy. He was sent for basic training and being tooled up for Europe to fight Hitler and likely land in Normandy. He told me his most important goal of World War II was to stay alive. I often thought about that. Great goal, Dad. A lot of people in this room appreciate that you succeeded. Well, one fateful day, he goes by a bulletin board on base and sees a flyer for training as a flight engineer. Anything to prolong it out, keep him going before he got shipped overseas. Working the maps with angles and rulers and trying to figure out where the plane was. The Allies were losing a lot of men to the Japanese in the air war in the Pacific and needed replacements. So Dad volunteered, and they sent him away for a month. When he returned, his regiment had left for Europe, and they turned him around and decided to send him what was really the American part of World War II, which was the Pacific War. On his way over to Japan, he heard about the Allies dropping some kind of new bomb. Then he heard the war was over. As a flight engineer, he was one of the first humans to witness the aftermath of what happened on Hiroshima, flying over the city a few days after the bomb, he said, from a few hundred feet. I've always wondered about the radiation risk he incurred and how it would affect his longevity. Well, Dad, I guess at almost 98, not much. He returned from the Pacific in the beginning of the baby boom, went to a dance in Brooklyn. That they had set up for returning GIs and girls to meet. Won the life lottery when he met Grandma at one of these, and the rest is history. Knowing my mom and dad and how assertive, let's say, it was my mom was, one could always have thought that my mom was mostly responsible for the success they had and the life they led. I certainly had thought that. But as time went on, when I really had to start managing their affairs late in their lives, I realized how much Dad directed more than anyone knew, that they were a two-person team. Mom and Dad were married 72 years. I tried to buy a 70th anniversary card 4 years ago for them. They are not made. You have to write in the number. Doesn't happen very often. Bottom line, this was a love story. For all your adult lives, you are both inseparable. As a family, we have always seen you not as Paul alone, but as Grandma and Grandpa, Mom and Dad, Paul and Claire. Well, you guys are once again together, and as per your wishes, you will be going to eternity side by side. At the end, physically it was difficult. Dad never lost any memory. Although physically it was difficult at the end, he never lost any memory or intelligence. He knew everything about everybody, knew everybody's name right until the last day. That was wonderful to see. I've heard some family talk about how Dad did live this long. Some thought it was that he played tennis till very late in life. Some thought it was the genes. Some think it was the pacemaker we had placed 30 years ago, when that he himself thought totally not indicated. In fact, when Grandma had her problems, he said the line in front of me, "Claire, don't say anything to him. He'll put in an unnecessary pacemaker in you too." Years later, I tried to remind him that once it was placed, he never fainted again, and what a coincidence, but he never bought that line. I celebrate you, Dad. I see our lives, our family, as a puzzle. All of us being our little pieces, put together, becomes large and wonderful. You are a large and important piece of that puzzle. I have more trouble with this than any. I have very few memories from childhood. One is of a little boy sitting on a low-hanging branch on a tree on a perfectly sunny weekend morning, drinking a 5-cent bottle of Coca-Cola and watching my father play a great third base. That's the way I will always remember you. We love you, Dad, and will forever miss you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Seeing how everyone interacted here. It was very much like that puzzle you described. All the pieces interlocking, making for a vast picture beyond description. So I love the analogy that you've made here. I'm going to offer now the prayer, the El Moleh Rachamim, God, the compassionate one. Even in times of sadness, we turn to God for support. I ask everyone who's comfortable to please stand. I also will be adding his Hebrew name to this prayer. El Moleh Rachamim, Shochein B'Maromim, Hamtzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShechina. B'ma'alot Kedoshim Toharim, Kezohar Rakia Mazirim. Et Nishmat Pinchas ben Mendel, Shalach Olamo, began Eden Tehei Menuchato, Ana Ba'al Rachamim, Hasti Rehu Beset Knapecha L'Olamim, Usror Bitzor Chaim et Nishmato, Adonai Hu Nachalato, V'yanuach B'Shalom Al Mishkavo V'Nomar, Amen. O God, exalted and full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence, among the holy and pure, to the soul of Paul Sussman, Pinchas ben Mendel, the son of Mendel, who has gone to his eternal home. Master of mercy, we beseech you, remember all the worthy and righteous deeds that he performed in the land of the living. May his soul be bound up in the bonds of life. The Lord is his portion. May he rest in the tranquility of shalom, of peace. And let us say, Amen. You may be seated. Any potential donations in Paul's memory are at the donor's discretion. There will be a Shiva service tomorrow night at 7 p.m. at the home of Jay and Ann. The entombment will be at the Locustwood Cemetery. Thank you. Adonai, miyagur bohalecha, miyishton bahar kodshecha, holech tamim before tzedek, v'daver emet l'chavo, lo ragal al leshono, lo asal ehu rapa, v'cherpa lo nasa al krulo. Nivzeh